Fernando grew up believing that his mother had abandoned him. It was a silent wound that he had carried in his chest since he was 5 years old, when she simply disappeared. His father, Ramon, always told him that Juana suffered from emotional instability and that one day she left on her own, leaving the two of them behind. The answers were vague, spoken with contained sadness, as if he himself had also been a victim of abandonment. The pain turned into silence, and the silence into routine. Fernando learned to get by, studied, worked, built a stable career as an engineer, but he was never able to form deep bonds. There was something unresolved, an absence that shaped his way of being. That night, when everything changed, Fernando was exhausted. He had left the office late and had hit the road to escape the heavy city traffic. The radio was playing softly, and the headlights illuminated the almost deserted road when, suddenly, a figure appeared, staggering in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes. The car skidded a few meters and stopped a few centimeters from the woman. Heart racing, he got out to see if everything was okay. The woman looked confused, with a dirty face, disheveled hair, and tattered clothes. When she looked up, Fernando felt the ground disappear. There was something in that look, something too familiar. Time seemed to freeze. That woman looked exactly like his mother. He stood there for a few seconds, unable to speak, while she mumbled incoherent words. He didn't know if it was fatigue or some kind of delirium, but that similarity was impossible to ignore. His instinct made him help her into the car. He called the nearest hospital and, with his heart pounding, explained that he had found a homeless woman apparently disoriented. During the drive, he tried to organize his thoughts, but everything seemed out of place. The image of his mother in the only photo he had of her when she was still young insisted on mixing with the aged face of the woman beside him. It was absurd, but what if it wasn't? If this part touched you, share it with someone who needs to believe in unlikely reunions. At the hospital, while the nurses were examining her, he insisted that they do a DNA test. It was embarrassing, and the professionals tried to explain that this was not a common procedure. But Fernando was determined. He did not sleep that night. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, reliving childhood memories, trying to remember details that he might have forgotten. The next day, he received a call from the hospital asking him to come in. When he arrived, he was greeted by a social worker with a serious expression. She asked him to sit down. Then, carefully and with calculated pauses, she broke the news. The woman was indeed Juana, his mother. The DNA test had confirmed it with 99.9% certainty. Fernando couldn't hold back his tears. The confirmation of what seemed impossible left his body in shock. His mother was alive. She had been alive all this time. But where? Why? The social worker explained that Juana had been admitted decades ago to a public psychiatric hospital in an old and poorly documented case. Her name was listed as Juana S., without a full surname, which made it difficult to track her down. She had been transferred from one institution to another several times until she was released due to lack of resources, ending up on the streets. No one ever came looking for her. No visits registered, no contact. It was as if she had been forgotten, erased. Still stunned, Fernando visited the ward where Juana was hospitalized. When he saw her up close, sitting in a wheelchair and staring out the window, his heart broke. She didn't recognize him. She only said random phrases like, "Are there any flowers outside?" Or, "I don't like cold soup." Fernando approached her, called her by name, and with a choked voice tried to talk. Nothing. She looked at him strangely, as if he were a nurse or just another visitor. Even so, he spent hours there by her side. He brought her flowers, tried to show her old photos. Little by little, he realized that it wouldn't be easy. There were 3 decades of pain, abandonment, and oblivion to be reconstructed, and he was willing to face them all. In the following days, Fernando immersed himself in a personal investigation. He requested copies of his mother's hospital records, spoke to former employees of the psychiatric hospital, and searched through forgotten files in government offices. He discovered that Juana had been hospitalized at the decision of her own father, Ramon. The alleged reason was a supposed bout of depression after Fernando's birth. However, the medical records did not indicate any confirmed diagnosis. Everything was vague, poorly filled out, as if the hospitalization had been done in a hurry without a proper evaluation. By all indications, Ramon had used his influence to hide Juana, to get her out of the way, to erase her existence. Anger took hold of Fernando like a silent flame. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there, cold and irrefutable. Returning home after these discoveries was suffocating. Fernando stared at the childhood furniture, the framed photos on the wall, his father's impeccable office, all of it weighing down on him with a weight he could no longer bear. When he finally confronted Ramon, the old man tried to keep his cool. He said he had done what was best for the family, that Juana was unstable, that she needed help. But when Fernando showed him the documents, the medical reports, and the abandonment records, his tone changed. Ramon remained silent. He didn't apologize. He didn't cry. He just murmured, "You wouldn't understand. It was a different time." That answer sealed the fate between them. Fernando left his father's house determined never to return. It was then that Fernando sought out a lawyer. He wanted justice, not only for Juana, but also for the boy he had been, deceived and deprived of his mother's love. The trial would be difficult, since the crimes had occurred decades ago. Still, the lawyer saw room to reopen the case, especially given the inhumane conditions in which Juana had been held for so long. They gathered documents, reports from health professionals, and even testimonies from former hospital employees. The story took on the contours of a scandal when it reached the local press. The image of Juana weakened with her sunken eyes, and her face, marked by time and neglect, made headlines on websites and newspapers. Public opinion quickly turned against Ramon, who had previously been seen as a respectable man. While the case was being processed in court, Fernando devoted himself to caring for his mother. He transferred Juana to a private clinic where she began receiving psychological counseling and physical therapy. He visited her every day, bringing her fruit, reading to her, showing her photos, and trying to recover some thread of shared memory. At first, Juana still lost her words, confused names, and called Fernando a kind young man. But little by little, small glimpses began to emerge. One day, when she saw him enter the room, she held his hand and said, "You have my son's eyes." Fernando burst into tears. That simple phrase was like a ray of sunshine after a lifetime of darkness. Hope, at last, began to be reborn. Over time, Fernando got to know a new version of his mother. Juana was sweet, observant, and even with the marks of suffering, she kept a serene look. She didn't remember everything, but she recognized voices, smells, and even melodies. Some days, she would hum a lullaby that she used to rock Fernando to sleep with as a baby. He recorded everything, every step forward, every word spoken, every laugh. It was like rebuilding a house with his own hands, brick by brick, without rushing. The bond between them grew stronger, even without the entire past. There was enough love in the present to fill the gaps. The doctors were impressed with Juana's recovery. They said that affection was doing more for her than any medicine. If you know someone trying to rebuild something that time almost took away, send them this story. Juana began to ask about what had happened. Memories came to her little by little, mixed with dreams and disconnected fragments. Fernando had to choose carefully what to tell her. He didn't want her to relive the pain all at once. Little by little, he explained that she had been hospitalized against her will and that he had believed for decades that she had abandoned him. Juana remained silent for a long time. Then, with tears in her eyes, she asked for forgiveness, as if she were to blame for everything. Fernando held her hands and told her that it was not her fault at all, that it was the fault of the system, of the omission, of her father's cowardice, and that now she was free. That conversation was a turning point. From that moment on, Juana began to recover not only her memories, but also her confidence in her own worth. They decided to move. Fernando sold the apartment where he lived and rented a single-story house with a garden and a balcony where Juana could walk safely. They began to cook together, take care of the plants, and even adopted a cat, which Juana named Bijou. The afternoons were filled with old music, photo sessions with instant cameras, and short walks around the neighborhood. Sometimes Fernando would still wake up in the middle of the night with a tight chest, remembering the years they had lost. But when he looked at his mother, sleeping peacefully in the next room, he found peace. Juana, in turn, began to write little notes where she recorded phrases like, "Today I felt alive," or "The day was beautiful." It was as if she was sewing together a new story with scraps of hope. Juana and Fernando's story began to gain repercussion outside the city. A documentary filmmaker from a national television station contacted them, proposing to tell the story in a series about forgotten injustices. At first, Fernando hesitated. He didn't want to expose his mother even more, but it was Juana who convinced him. She said that if their pain could prevent other women from going through the same thing, then it was worth it. Filming began carefully, always respecting her emotional limits. When the series aired, thousands of people were moved. Letters arrived from all over the country. Some told similar stories. Others offered affection, support, and gratitude for giving a voice to those who had been silenced for so long. Juana smiled like she hadn't smiled in decades. She felt that, finally, her existence had meaning again. If you also believe that every life deserves to be heard, follow the page and stay with us. The impact of the series helped to drive change. The Public Prosecutor's Office created a task force to investigate other similar cases of unjustified hospitalizations. Retired doctors were summoned to testify, old files were reviewed, and new guidelines were proposed to ensure that no one would be hospitalized without technical support, without hearing, without defense. Fernando began to be invited to lectures, interviews, and human rights events. He always made it clear he was not a hero. He just wanted justice. At one of these meetings, he met Helena, a psychologist who worked with victims of institutional violence. They began to talk, exchange experiences, and, little by little, deeper feelings were born. For the first time in many years, Fernando allowed himself to dream of a bright future, and not just repair the ruins of the past. Helena not only understood what Fernando had been through, she respected it. She never pressured him, never invaded spaces that were still healing. She approached him slowly, first as a friend, then as a partner, offering company on difficult days and joy in simple moments. Juana immediately took a liking to her. She said that Helena smelled like a clean house, which to her was the highest possible compliment. Their three lives, until then marked by parallel stories, began to intertwine naturally. On weekends, they had picnics in the park, played dominoes on the porch, and watched old movies. Fernando, who had felt incomplete for so long, finally began to recognize himself as whole, as a son, as a man, and who knows, as someone ready to love again. Meanwhile, Ramon was convicted of false statements, abuse of authority, and false imprisonment. The sentence was symbolic, house arrest due to his advanced age. But the public trial was much harsher. Longtime friends cut off contact. Students denounced him for past sexist speeches and attitudes. His reputation, built over decades, collapsed like a house of cards. Fernando decided not to visit him. He told his lawyer that he did not want to hear any more excuses or see forced repentance. Juana, in turn, sent a single letter to her ex-husband. It was short, direct, with only one sentence: "The woman you tried to erase has blossomed." That sentence was read by Ramon in silence, without a response. It was the end of a cycle, Over time, Juana began attending support groups. At first, she just listened. She sat in the back with a cup of tea in her hands, watching other women talk about trauma, abandonment, and new beginnings. But one day, when a young woman told her she felt ashamed for having been hospitalized against her will, Juana approached her, held her hand, and said, "It wasn't your fault. It never is." From that moment on, she became a regular presence at the meetings, offering simple but truthful words. It was as if, by helping other women, she was also putting her own pieces back together. Fernando proudly watched from a distance. He knew that his mother was rebuilding herself in her own way, and that this was more valuable than any court ruling. The new house gained colors, smells, and life. Juana filled the kitchen with sweet aromas of breads and cakes that she learned to make by watching videos on her cell phone. Fernando was surprised by her curiosity. She wanted to learn everything, to experience the time that had been taken from her. One late afternoon, while watering the plants, she said to her son, "Life tastes new now." He smiled, holding back tears, because there, in that simplicity, there was a miracle. Helena was already part of the routine. She helped with the medicines, read books to Juana before bed. At times, the three of them would look at each other and know, without saying anything, that they were building something rare. It wasn't a conventional family, but it was, after all, a whole family. With his emotional stability restored, Fernando began to revisit other areas of his life. He resumed personal projects that he had abandoned, went back to running in the park, refurbished his old bicycle, and even enrolled in a photography course, something he had always wanted to do. He carried a small camera with him and began to record moments of his daily life with Juana and Helena. Each photo became a symbol of overcoming, proof that it was possible to start over even after a lifetime of absences. He posted some images on social media with short stories, and the texts went viral. People from all over Brazil commented, shared, and sent messages of support. Without meaning to, Fernando and Juana had become a symbol of resistance and affection. One morning, while they were having coffee on the porch, Juana looked up at the cloudy sky and said, "I think it's going to rain today, just like it did that day." Fernando asked, "Which day?" She paused and said, with an almost imperceptible smile, "The day I saw you for the first time in the hospital. You looked at me with so much love that I thought it was a dream." Fernando held her hand and replied, "You were the one who gave me the strength to carry on, even without knowing it." These little conversations became the hallmark of their mornings. Simple but profound conversations that only those who have experienced pain could understand. Little by little, Juana freed herself from the shadow of the past and once again assumed the role of mother, not as an obligation, but as a loving choice. One of the most memorable moments for Fernando was the day Juana asked to visit the sea. She said that before everything happened, she dreamed of taking her son to see the waves, feel the sand on her feet, breathe that salty air that, according to her, cures any hidden sadness. Fernando organized the trip carefully. He chose a simple inn by the sea and prepared everything so that she would feel safe. When they arrived, Juana took off her shoes, walked slowly to the water's edge and stood there looking at the horizon. She cried silently, not from pain, but from relief. It was as if she was giving something back to herself, the right to live simple moments that had previously been stolen from her. On that same trip, Fernando took a photo of Juana from behind, looking out to sea, her dress fluttering in the wind. He posted the image with the caption, "30 years of silence, a moment of peace." The post reached thousands of people and was used in awareness campaigns about mental health and institutional violence. Juana didn't mind the exposure. She said that if her story helped someone escape the same fate, then it was worth it. During an interview, she summed it all up with a phrase that moved the country. "They put me in an internment so that I would be forgotten, but now I remember who I am." That phrase became the title of a book, then a documentary, And more importantly, it became a beacon for many other stories that came to light. Eventually, Fernando and Helena decided to live together. The house, which was already full of affection, officially became a home for the three of them. There was no ceremony or rush. It was a natural decision, made between meals, with Juana smiling in approval. Fernando felt that for the first time, his life had a calm rhythm. The ghosts still appeared from time to time, especially on birthdays, on days when he looked at old photographs, or when his father's name came up in some news story. But now he knew how to deal with them. He was no longer a man paralyzed by the past. He was someone who had chosen to move forward, with truth, with presence, and with love. Juana began writing letters to herself. Letters that began with "Dear Juana" and ended with words of encouragement and pride. She kept them all in a small wooden box on her nightstand. She once said to Fernando, "I write to remind myself that I exist, because for many years I couldn't even see myself anymore." Some of these letters were read at lectures, events, and television programs. They became symbols of resistance and identity. Juana was no longer just a woman who had survived an injustice. She was a role model, a survivor who spoke with gentleness, but also with firmness. And Fernando, seeing her like this, felt immense pride. Because of all the truths he had discovered throughout his life, the most powerful was this: his mother was a giant. On a sunny Sunday, Juana was honored at an event defending women's rights in the capital. She received a symbolic medal and was called to the stage to speak. Many expected her to decline out of shyness or fragility, but Juana surprised everyone. She walked slowly but firmly to the microphone. She looked at the audience for a few seconds, took a deep breath and began. "For years, my voice was silenced. Today, it is here. Weak at times, but mine. Thank you for listening to me." She didn't say much more, and she didn't need to. The applause came from a standing ovation, long and emotional. Fernando cried like a child. It was as if all the silence of 30 years had finally found a sound. On the way home in the car, Juana looked out the window with a slight smile. Helena, sitting next to her, said softly, "You know you changed a lot of people's lives, right?" Juana replied, "I only wanted to change mine. The rest came with it." The phrase echoed in Fernando's head. It was true. Their healing had been intimate, but it reverberated far and wide. That night, the three of them sat at the table for dinner and, without planning, gave thanks for the day. Not a traditional prayer, but a spontaneous thanks for life, for courage, for being reunited, and for finally being together. It was one of those moments that no one photographs, but that are kept forever in the most important place, the heart. As the months went by, Juana began to feel more tired. Some tests showed natural fatigue, nothing alarming, but that required more care. Fernando was worried, but she was clear. "I don't want to live in fear. I've already wasted too much time." So they adapted their routine so that she would feel comfortable, without taking away her sense of freedom. They reduced their public commitments, prioritized time at home, and let time go by slowly. Helena helped with everything, with affection and respect. On good days, Juana would cook and tell stories. On bad days, she would lie down listening to music, with Fernando by her side holding her hand. Life had become concrete poetry, made of simple gestures and deep meanings. One day, Juana asked for something that took Fernando by surprise. She wanted to visit her parents' graves in a small town in the countryside where she had never returned. She said she needed to close a cycle. The trip was short but symbolic. There, in front of the aging tombstones, she stood in silence for a few minutes, then whispered, "If you only knew how much it hurt, but I survived." On the way back, Fernando noticed that there was something different about her, a lightness, almost as if she were more whole. It was as if this return to the past had somehow freed something inside her. On the way back, she held her son's arm, rested her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." That phrase, "thank you for finding me," was engraved on Fernando like an invisible tattoo. He repeated it mentally, like a mantra, every time life threatened to lose its axis. Because deep down, it was he who felt found by a truth, by a love that survived time, and by a strength he had never known before. The days went by calmer after that trip. Juana was busy with the letters, with the notes of encouragement, with the flowers in the garden. Helena and Fernando began to plan a small wedding ceremony, something simple, without fanfare. They wanted to celebrate not only their union, but everything they had built together. A new beginning, a shared healing, a home rebuilt on ruins, transformed into a foundation. The afternoon they told Juana the news, she laughed and clapped her hands slowly. She said she already knew, that she could feel it in their eyes. She asked to help with the preparations, even if it was just folding the napkins or choosing a song to play at the entrance. When Fernando asked her what song she would choose, Juana answered without thinking, "The one you sang to me when I was little. I don't remember the words, but I remember the melody." That deeply moved her son, who spent the whole night trying to remember which song it was. The next day, she showed up with a small, old recorder, with a tape she had found among her childhood belongings. When she pressed play, a young, trembling voice sang the song. Juana closed her eyes and smiled. It was her. The wedding took place late in the afternoon, in the backyard of the house, surrounded by flowers that Juana had picked herself. Only a few of Helena's close friends, neighbors, and co-workers were present. Juana was led to the improvised altar by Fernando, arm in arm with her, smiling with tears in her eyes. She was wearing a light, simple dress and an old flower-shaped brooch that had belonged to her mother. When she saw them exchanging vows, she was silently moved. This was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of life that refused to be silenced. After the ceremony, during the toast, Juana gave a short speech. Love has no expiration date. All it takes is courage. And everyone applauded, standing. In the days that followed, Fernando began writing a book. It wasn't an autobiography, nor a manual for overcoming obstacles. It was an open letter to all the children who grew up with unanswered questions, to all the mothers who were erased, to all the silences that once deserved to be heard. Juana read the passages little by little, always with a discreet smile and comments like, "This is beautiful, son," or "Here you can be more direct." Helena helped with the revision, and little by little the text took shape. When it was ready, it was published by an independent publisher. It didn't have a big publicity campaign, but it sold thousands of copies through word of mouth. Because real stories, when they touch you deeply, don't need the spotlight. They just need the truth. The book's impact brought even more visibility to Juana's case. Universities began to cite it in psychology, law, and social work courses. Professors began to use it as support material for debates on medical ethics, abuse of authority, and human rights. Fernando was invited to give lectures at academic centers and seminars, always emphasizing that his intention was never to become a symbol of anything, just to tell the truth. Juana, on the other hand, continued her quiet life, oblivious to the noise of the repercussions. She took care of her plants, wrote new notes, and whenever she saw someone sad around her, she would say, "The heart also needs tea and a blanket." She didn't know it, but she became a reference without meaning to. Over time, Juana's health began to waver more frequently. The doctors said there was no specific reason other than her age and the scars her body had accumulated over the years. She herself said that her soul had already lived a lot. On one of those difficult days, Fernando sat next to her on the bed and asked if she had any regrets. Juana thought for a moment, looked at him and replied, "Yes, having believed that I was weak." He held her hand, moved. "You were the strongest woman I ever knew." Juana smiled. "It took a while, but now I know it too." That was one of the last conversations between the two. There was no pain, just the serene acceptance of someone who had finally come to terms with her own story. Juana passed away one peaceful morning in her sleep. Helena noticed first when she brought the usual tea to her room. She called Fernando carefully, without fanfare, and he understood immediately. He sat down next to his mother, kissed her still warm forehead, and remained there in silence for several minutes. There was no despair, no anger, only gratitude. They had won. Against time, against oblivion, against everything. There were few people at the wake. Distant relatives, some neighbors, old colleagues from support groups. Fernando read an excerpt from the book in her honor, and at the end he said, "Today, I do not say goodbye to the woman I lost. Today, I thank the woman I found." It was a calm, beautiful goodbye, just the way Juana would have wanted it, without too many flowers, without long speeches, just the truth. After his mourning, Fernando retreated for a while. He didn't want to give interviews. He didn't want to go back to giving lectures right away. He spent weeks looking at photos, rereading the letters Juana had left, rediscovering nuances of his mother that he might not have noticed while she was alive. He cried, smiled, wrote. Helena was his foundation during this period, discreet, present, steadfast. They talked about Juana as if she was still there, observing everything in the garden, correcting the position of the pots, putting too much sugar in the coffee. And in a way, she really was. Her presence had become ingrained in their routine, on the walls of the house, in the little phrases she had left scattered throughout notebooks and loose papers. Fernando was now the guardian of this living memory. Months later, Fernando decided to create an institute named after his mother, the Juana Institute of Human Rights and Memory. The idea was to offer legal and psychological support to victims of unjust compulsory hospitalizations, in addition to promoting educational activities on civil rights. He invited Helena to coordinate the team of psychologists, and together they structured the project with the same care with which they had reconstructed Juana's life. In the first year, they dealt with dozens of cases, many from poor families, without access to information or legal resources. Each story that came in was confirmation that the path chosen had a purpose. Fernando said, "What they did to my mother cannot have been in vain," and it was not. The Institute also began organizing discussion groups, workshops in schools, visits to communities, and lectures at universities. In one of these groups, a woman with a trembling voice told us that she had been hospitalized by her own husband and that she was only able to leave because a neighbor insisted on looking for her. She looked at Fernando with tears in her eyes and said, "If I had found you before, my story would have been different." That touched him deeply. Not because it was a compliment, but because it showed how urgent it was. The injustice Juana had experienced was no exception. It was a social wound that still bled in many homes, and now, through her, he could make a difference. That was the mission Juana had left, without ever having written it down, but which he read clearly every day. As the Institute progressed, Fernando was invited to speak at an international conference on mental health and public policy. It was the first time he would leave the country, and the first time he would speak in another language. He spent weeks rehearsing, translating excerpts from the book, and asking Helena to help him adapt expressions. On the day of the presentation, he took with him a white handkerchief that had belonged to his mother. During his speech, he told Juana's story with emotion and concluded with the same sentence she had written in her letter to her father. "The woman you tried to erase has blossomed." The audience, made up of experts, activists, and representatives of NGOs from several countries, gave him a standing ovation. At that moment, Fernando felt that his mother's story had crossed borders and would continue to blossom, even in other languages. Back in Brazil, Fernando resumed his projects with even greater vigor. He wanted to take the Institute to other regions, form partnerships with universities, and train health and legal professionals to deal with similar cases. In one of the meetings with the team, they suggested creating an award named after Juana to honor women who had bravely faced silence. Helena thought the idea was wonderful. The award was launched the following year, and in the first edition, received more than 100 nominations. At the award ceremony, Fernando said, "My mother did not go back in time, but she arrived in the future, and today she is here in each of these women." The phrase made headlines, but for him, it was simply the truth. Juana was still present, not in statues or portraits, but in the footsteps of those who refused to be erased. Despite all the recognition, Fernando remained a simple man. He still made his own coffee, washed the dishes after dinner, and tended the garden with the same dedication he had when Juana was still there. In the late afternoons, he would sit on the porch with Helena, and together they would remember phrases, laughs, and stories that seemed small but held entire worlds. On one of those days, he found inside an old book a note from his mother that he had never seen. It said, "If one day you doubt yourself, remember that you were the one who brought me back." Fernando folded the paper carefully and put it in his wallet. It became his silent amulet. Whenever he faced a new challenge, he would touch the note and reconnect with his origins. Helena was also flourishing. In addition to coordinating the institute, she began teaching classes at a local university, focusing on mental health and clinical empathy. She brought not only theory, but also experience to the classroom. She spoke of Juana's story as an example of how the system can fail and how affection can heal. At home, the two discussed ideas, exchanged texts, and put together projects. But they also knew how to disconnect, play, and travel without rushing. They had learned from Juana the importance of the present, and when they thought about the future, it was no longer with fear or anxiety. It was with lightness. They dreamed of adopting a child, not to complete anything, but to overflow, because the love they had built was already too great to fit just between the two of them. The idea of adoption matured naturally. Fernando and Helena went through all the legal processes, interviews, and assessments. They were transparent from the beginning, telling their life story and saying that they were ready to welcome, not demand. After months of waiting, they received the call. There was an 8-year-old girl named Leah who had been in a shelter since she was 3. She was shy, suspicious, but very curious. When they met, Leah barely spoke. She sat there drawing in silence, but at the end of the meeting she looked at Fernando and said, "You seem calm." He smiled, "And you seem brave." That was the beginning of a new chapter, without euphoria, without idealizations, but with the same honesty that had sustained everything up until that point. In the first few months, Leah took a while to trust. She cried at night, avoided hugs, and had frequent nightmares. Fernando understood. He knew that trust is not something you ask for, it's something you build. Every night, he would sit by her bedside and tell her a story, sometimes made up, sometimes about her mother Juana. Little by little, Leah started asking questions. She wanted to know what Juana was like, why she had been away for so long, how she had come back. And Fernando told her everything gently, without hiding his pain, but always showing what came next. Leah liked the garden part the most, the letters, the cat named Bijou, and it was exactly on the day she asked to plant a flower with him that Fernando understood. Juana had left space for another one to bloom. Leah chose a yellow flower. She said it looked happy and strong, just like the lady in the stories. The three of them planted it together in a special corner of the garden where Juana liked to sit. Later, Fernando wrote a little sign with the flower's name and placed it there. Juana's flower, so that no one will ever be forgotten. It was a simple moment, but full of meaning. Leah started visiting the flower every day, watering it carefully, and even talking to it. Helena said it was her way of connecting with something bigger. Fernando just watched, his heart full. He knew that this girl, even though she was so young, had also been hurt by silence, and that now, like his mother, she was also finding a voice. Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell us in the comments. Your story may touch someone else too. As the months went by, Leah changed. She started to smile more. Often she brought colorful drawings to the living room wall, and she even made new friends at school. One of her school projects had the theme, My Family. She drew 3 people and wrote underneath, "They listened to me." When she showed the drawing to Fernando, he couldn't hold back the tears. It was as if the entire journey, from the first scare on the road to that scribbled paper, had been worth every second. Leah didn't need grand promises or long explanations. She just needed someone who was there whole. And Fernando more than ever was, because now he understood some wounds don't heal with time, but with presence, truth, and love. The Juana Institute was growing, but Fernando kept the essence of the project intact. He did not accept sponsors who wanted to exploit his mother's image or turn her legacy into an advertising campaign. He preferred to grow slowly, consistently, and with dignity. Many of the new initiatives arose from simple conversations with Leah, who suggested activities such as telling stories to those who are sad or building a house with books inside. One day, she asked if she could donate her toys to other children at the shelter. Fernando and Helena accompanied her, and that day, Leah told her own story to the other children for the first time. She did not cry. She spoke firmly, as if she knew that scars hurt, but no longer needed to be hidden. Fernando looked at her in silence, and in his mind, he heard Juana's voice saying, "She has blossomed." That night, back home, Leah drew 3 hearts connected by a thin line and wrote on top, "Family is who takes care of our silence." Fernando put the drawing on the refrigerator, next to the photos of his mother and the notes she left. That house was definitely a sanctuary of reconstructed affections, a place where no one needed to be perfect, only whole, where listening was worth more than any gift, where time was measured in gestures. Fernando remembered when it all began. The scare on the road, the woman's face in the darkness, the DNA test, and now there he was, with a new life in his arms, surrounded by love, roots, and a future. It wasn't redemption, it was continuity, and that was enough. Every year after Juana's birthday, even after she passed away, Fernando maintained a tradition, planting a new flower in the garden. He invited some friends from the Institute, read excerpts from the book, and shared some unpublished memory he had found among his mother's notes. Leah helped choose the flowers, and Helena prepared simple cakes, just the way Juana liked them. It was a time of celebration, not sadness. Juana had taught her that memory didn't have to be a burden, it could be a bond. And with each new flower, the number of lives touched by her story also grew. Some people came from far away just to say thank you. Others sent letters saying that they had started visiting forgotten relatives in institutions, that they had written letters to their mothers, that they had learned to truly listen. On one of those birthdays, Fernando found a last letter from his mother inside an old box that Leah had accidentally rummaged through. It was short, handwritten, with the shaky handwriting of the last few months. "Son, if you ever feel tired, remember that you brought me back, that you taught me to be a mother again, and that you gave me the chance to see the world with different eyes. I love you with everything I was, with everything I became. Yours, always, Juana." He read it in silence, unable to hold back his tears. Helena hugged him, and Leah, not understanding everything, also came closer. It was as if that letter were the last piece of a puzzle put together with much love, and now, finally, complete. Juana's letter was not kept in a drawer. Fernando had it framed and placed on the wall of the living room, right in the center, among photos of his mother, Leah's drawings, and certificates from the Institute. It was not a relic to be admired, but a living reminder of everything they had overcome. Everyone who entered the house read those words and was moved. Some remained silent, others cried without hiding it. And always after a while, they said the same thing. "This place has a soul." And it really did. Every corner of that home held history, pain, and new beginnings. It was the kind of place that didn't need luxury to be beautiful. It just needed to exist with truth. Leah grew up quickly. She became curious about everything. Fernando's past, the causes of the institute, the difficulties faced by other families. Once, she asked if it was possible to stop people from hurting each other. Fernando calmly replied, "You can't stop everything, daughter, but you can make fewer people suffer in silence." Leah thought for a few seconds and replied, "Then that's what I want to do when I grow up." Helena smiled emotionally. The seed of empathy was germinating. Juana's story, which had begun with a forgotten woman, was now inspiring a girl to take care of the world. And for Fernando, this was more than justice. It was a legacy, the kind that doesn't fit into written inheritances, but that shapes futures. Over the years, the Juana Institute expanded to other cities. They formed regional centers, trained volunteers, and created a national support network. Each team carried with them the essence of Juana's story: listening, dignity, truth. Fernando began to work more behind the scenes, making room for new leaders and new voices. He wanted the Institute to no longer depend on him to continue existing. "If one day I am no longer here, may the mission live on," he would say. And it did, because it was made up of committed people, of real stories, of pain that became bridges. Fernando didn't need to be present everywhere. Juana already was. Helena, in turn, became a reference in the field of community mental health. She created training programs focused on humanized practices, published articles, and gave lectures abroad. But she never lost her ground. She continued to be that woman who liked to drink tea at night, plant basil in the kitchen, and laugh at the little things. Leah, now 13, wrote letters like her grandmother. She kept them in colorful envelopes and left them hidden in the books in the house for Fernando and Helena to find by surprise. One of them said, "Thank you for choosing me. I choose you every day." As Fernando read it, his heart sank again in that beautiful and serene way that only true encounters can cause. One day, while visiting a school to give a talk on human rights, Fernando heard a student ask, "What makes someone not give up?" He thought for a few seconds before answering, "The memory of someone who never gave up on you." And he realized at that moment that this was the basis of everything he had built. It was not indignation that moved him, nor the desire for revenge. It was love. The love for a woman who had been forcibly erased, but who left deep scars even in her absence, and who, when she was finally found again, showed her son that it was still possible to rebuild. That was what he wanted to convey, that even when it seems too late, there can still be a way back, back to yourself, back to the other. From time to time, Fernando would return to that road where it all began. He would stop the car on the shoulder and look toward the stretch where he had seen Juana for the first time in so many years. It was an ordinary spot, nothing special. But there his life had begun again. Leah would accompany him sometimes. She would ask him how he knew it was his mother. "I can't explain it. It was as if my heart recognized her before my eyes." She would look closely and then say, "I think that's what they call a miracle." Fernando would smile. Maybe it really was. Not the kind that makes noise, but the kind that whispers certainty into the soul. And in that place, so simple, he always made the same silent promise, that he would never let the world forget Juana's name. On the anniversary of the founding of the Institute, Helena prepared a surprise. She gathered collaborators, former beneficiaries, old and new partners. She organized an exhibition with photos, letters, and symbolic objects from Juana's journey. In the center of the room, she placed her rocking chair, the same one where she used to spend afternoons in the garden. Around it, there were testimonies from people whose lives had changed because of her story. Fernando remained silent for a while, looking at everything with teary eyes. Then he approached the chair, touched the back with affection, and said softly, "You are still here, Mother." Leah, holding his hand, whispered, "And you will continue, forever." That night was more than a celebration. It was a collective reminder that memory can be a living force when cultivated with love. The exhibition became a traveling exhibition and visited several cities, including schools, cultural centers, and public libraries, Wherever it went, it touched people. It was more than just telling a sad story. It was showing what comes from reuniting, listening, and the courage to not give up on others. Fernando received messages from young people saying they had spoken to their parents for the first time in years, from children who had met their mothers in shelters, from women who decided to report past abuse after reading about Juana. And he knew that none of this was an individual achievement. It was the work of something greater, something that was born from deep pain, but was carefully cultivated until it became a path for others. And that, for him, was the most beautiful form of eternity. Over time, Fernando wrote a second book. This time, it was not about Juana, but about the stories that emerged from her. Stories of people who recognized themselves in pain, who broke the silence, who started over. He titled the work Invisible Roots, in homage to those silent connections that unite. Distant stories through the same strength of survival. Leah illustrated the cover with a simple drawing, a tree with yellow flowers and 3 figures holding hands. The book was launched in a small auditorium, attended by those who had walked with him since the beginning. Fernando read an excerpt where he said, "My mother's stories saved me, but it was your stories that kept me going." That was it. He was now part of a collective, of something that expanded beyond him. Leah, now a teenager, began to participate more actively in the Institute. She created a listening group for young people, taught emotional writing workshops, and presented plays based on real stories. Fernando watched with silent pride as the girl who had once arrived silent and now enchanted audiences with her firm voice. Helena joked that Leah had inherited her grandmother's spirit, and perhaps she had, the way of welcoming, of transforming pain into creation, of asking questions that disarmed even the most resistant. One night after an event, Leah asked her father, "Do you think Grandma would see me with pride?" Fernando held her hand, looked into her eyes and replied, "She already sees you, and she smiles every day for you." That answer left a lasting impression on Leah. From then on, she began writing a diary in the form of letters to Juana, even though she had never met her in life. "Dear Grandma, today I helped a friend who didn't want to talk to anyone." Or, "Today I thought about what your smell would be, like if it would resemble the flowers in the garden." Leah filled pages with feelings that she couldn't always name, but that flowed naturally. Fernando found one of those notebooks one day, forgotten on the table, and read some passages with a heavy heart. He saw there a strong, silent link that connected 3 generations marked by pain and the conscious choice to love. He didn't interfere. He just left a note next to it, written in his own handwriting. "She would also write to you." Over the years, Fernando learned to be silent. That silence that is not absence, but listening. He would spend long periods of time simply observing. Leah reading on the couch, Helena making tea, the sun shining on the plants in the garden. He knew that life was now more than movement, it was permanence. He no longer needed to prove anything, nor seek answers that the past would not provide. He had learned from Juana that time does not erase pain, but teaches us to carry it lightly, and that love, when it is true, does not require physical presence to continue existing. All it takes is remembrance, care, and repetition of gestures. That was how he kept Juana alive, in the way he opened the windows in the morning, in the choice of words, in the respect for silence, in the long hug before bed. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Fernando received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Cecilia, a resident of a distant city who had stumbled upon Juana's story in a public library. In the letter, she said that she had read the entire book right there in one afternoon, and that for the first time in 20 years, she had been able to cry for something other than pain. She said that her brother had institutionalized her during an inheritance dispute and that no one had believed her. The letter ended with a simple sentence: "You gave me a voice. Thank you for reminding me that I am not alone." Fernando stared at the paper for a while. Then he carefully folded it, put it in the same box, where he kept his mother's notes, and lit a silent candle on the porch. That night, Leah asked him why he was quieter than usual. Fernando told him about the letter, and Leah responded with surprising calm. "We don't know where our words will end up, but if they were born of love, they always arrive." He smiled, moved. That girl who once barely spoke was now teaching him about life with the same wisdom that Juana transmitted, not with speeches, but with presence. That night, the three of them had dinner together as always, with laughter, stories, and hot tea. And when Fernando turned off the kitchen light, he was certain of something he would never forget. Sometimes, the most beautiful families are not the ones that have always been together. They are the ones that have chosen to stay together, even after everything. Fernando began writing what would be his last book, not out of tiredness, but out of completeness. He wanted to end the cycle with a text that was not about pain or overcoming, but about permanence. He called the project Casa Viva and dedicated each chapter to a part of his routine. Breakfast, walks with Leah, silent afternoons, birthdays with a simple cake. Each page was a reminder that life happens in the details. Helena revised the texts at night with a constant smile. Leah illustrated, now with more mature lines, but still full of the sweetness she always had. It was a work of 6 hands, including Juana's, who was no longer there, but whose words still guided the paths of the house. In the last chapter, Fernando wrote, "The world tried to silence my mother's voice, but it blossomed in me, and now it blossoms in my daughter." What was silence became a garden. When he finished typing, he stared at the screen for a while. Then he closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and went to the garden. The yellow flower, the first one Leah had planted, was still there, taller, stronger, surrounded by other colors. He bent down, ran his hand over the petals, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." It was a moment all his own, but everything was there. The pain, the healing, the reunion, and the certainty that despite what was lost, what remained was immense and true. The launch of Casa Viva was intimate, almost like a family celebration. No large auditoriums, cameras, or long speeches. It was held in the garden of the house, with improvised chairs, lights hanging from the trees, and soft music playing in the background. Helena made cookies. Leah recited an excerpt from the book, and Fernando read the last paragraph aloud, his voice firm but emotional. Close friends, former colleagues of Juana, and young people who were helped by the Institute were present. When the reading ended, there was a beautiful, respectful silence, the kind that only arises when everyone understands that they have just witnessed something real. Then came spontaneous applause, and with it, many hugs. That night, after everyone had left, Fernando sat alone while in his mother's rocking chair. Leah had hung a plaque on it that read, "Where everything began to come back." He stroked the back gently and closed his eyes. He smelled the flowers, heard the distant laughter coming from the kitchen, and let his memory do its work. Juana was still there, not as a sad memory, but as the root of everything that had blossomed. Fernando understood that it was no longer about overcoming. It was about continuity, and that, for him, was more powerful than any legal victory or public recognition, because true justice, he now knew, is making love a living legacy. The years passed serenely. Fernando and Helena grew old together, unhurriedly, enjoying the small joys that life continued to offer. Leah went her own way, but always came home on the weekends. She had become a psychologist like her mother and worked with vulnerable teenagers. She said that every story she heard had a piece of her own, and Juana's too. On Sundays, the three of them would sit in the garden to have coffee and talk about the week. Time, which had previously felt like an absence, was now an ally. Every wrinkle on Fernando's face carried a memory. Every shared silence was full of meaning. The house, with its flowers and stories, continued to be a shelter. One day, Leah brought a large envelope. Inside, there was a proposal from a publishing group to transform Juana's entire story into an audio-visual series. Fernando read it carefully, thought about it, and said he would only accept if he had the freedom to keep the truth, without exaggeration, without romanticization. My mother's story doesn't need to be embellished. It is already beautiful because it is real. Helena and Leah agreed. And that was how, years later, Juana's story reached even more hearts. In movie theaters, on televisions, in dinner conversations, people heard, saw, and felt everything that Fernando had experienced. Not to move people, but to transform them. Because in the end, that was what it was all about. Showing that even after a lifetime of silence, it is still possible to be heard. The final episode of the series showed a simple scene. An elderly woman sitting in a garden, surrounded by flowers, writing a letter. The actress who played Juana had a sweet, firm gaze, and the letter she read aloud was real, one of the many that Juana had left for herself. Dear Juana, you were not weak, you were strong in silence. Now your voice has color, smell, and shape, and it continues to echo, even when you rest. When this scene aired, thousands of people wrote on social media. They shared stories, memories, reconciliations. And Fernando, from the couch at home, watched it all with teary eyes. Helena by his side, Leah with her head on his shoulder. He felt that his mission was complete. When the broadcast ended, Leah stood up, picked up a letter she had written, and read it to her parents. Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for teaching me that family is not blood, it is affection. That listening is more important than talking, and that love, when cared for with patience, becomes a home. Fernando cried without shame. Helena smiled, squeezing his hand, and Juana, in that silence full of presence, seemed to be there with them. Not as a sad memory, but as a root, a flower, a foundation. She was the one who held everything together. She always was. Fernando ended that day as he had done for years, watering the garden. He stopped in front of the first flower planted by Leah, now branched out and full of new buds. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath and whispered, "You bloomed, Mom, and so did I." Then he went into the house. Did you stay this far? Show that it was worth it. Like, comment or share with someone who needs to feel that way.